Right, hi everyone. My name's Trish. I'm producer from Three Wise Monkeys. A couple of years ago, we did a short film called Ethel with our lead character who went through Alzheimer's. This topic has stayed very close to our hearts, and we've wanted to do something during the COVID pandemic to try and help the community. So I'm joined by a fantastic panel of people who are going to talk for about 30-40 minutes, and then we'll have some questions and answers at the end. Thanks everyone for joining us. Right, so first we've got Dominique. Please introduce yourself.
I am Dominique, and I'm the Managing Director of a company called the Good Care Group. We provide live-in care to people in their own homes through an alternative to moving into a care home, and just over half of our client population are living with dementia.
Alexis.
Hi, I'm Alexis Sobrano. I am the Dementia Service Manager and Clinical Specialist at Sweet Tree Home Care Services. Like Dominique, we provide living care and also 2-hour to 24-hour care for people who are living in their own homes in the community. Part of my role is supporting people in the community outside of the Sweet Tree world, doing events like this that you've hosted today, Trish. So thank you.
Thank you. Ant.
Hi, I'm Anthony Cockcroft. I own and run a group of companies. Today I'm here on behalf of Find Memory Care. Find are best known for their innovative creations to assist those living with dementia. We are the originators of the first dementia-specific signage, which has led us on to creating whole environments in care and facilities in hospitals. Find create and design, manufacture a range of products specially designed to reduce restlessness, stress and anxiety and create stimulating environments for those affected and living with dementia.
Thank you. And Jane.
Hi, my name's Jane Pritchard. I'm an Admiral nurse, and for anybody that's not familiar with Admiral nurses, we're specialist dementia nurses. And like Dominique, I also work for the Good Care Group, provide supporting carers who are themselves looking after people with dementia primarily.
Thank you very much, everyone. So let's start off with kind of, obviously this pandemic's been quite awful for absolutely everyone, but specifically, how has it affected people with dementia, Alzheimer's? Can we kind of have a little chat about that, please?
I'm happy to kick that off. I think I've seen a lot of impact with the social distancing rules. A lot of people with dementia and related cognitive disorders are having difficulty understanding why they have to social distance and why there have been so many changes in their day-to-day routine. And as we all know here on the panel, maintaining routines is incredibly important for people who have memory issues, and that suddenly being disrupted, what feels like overnight, has been incredibly difficult, creating a lot of anxiety, seeing a lot of related behaviors such as agitation, pacing, wandering, sleep disturbance, etc.
Yeah, and I think the impact of isolation just on how people are feeling. So the usual interactions that they might have in any given day, it's not really understanding why they're no longer happening, and equipping our professional care workforce with responses to that can be quite challenging at times.
Homes that we're working with are reporting increased distress and anxiety due to the unusual PPE people are wearing within care homes. They're used to a particular friendly face and also a friendly voice, and these can be muffled by the mask, and people don't have that recognition. So that's causing a great deal of anxiety for some of the residents. This also can lead on to increasing trips, falls, and it can affect nutrition as well. It has a whole knock-on effect. So not particularly good on the reports that we're receiving.
And just to follow on from that with the PPE, I think it can be incredibly disorienting for someone to suddenly see someone, especially in the full PPE, gloves, apron, mask. It can make you feel like you're in the hospital. You can disorient to your home. It can be quite confusing for someone.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about the fact that obviously you're restricted suddenly with very little visual, and specifically that could be extremely confusing for someone who needs that familiarity.
I think in a living care setting, and certainly just before we went into formal lockdown, we had been working with our clients, their families and our professional carers on restricting the movement because of what we knew was likely to start happening. And I think that's helped, where we've had carers and clients truly shielded. It has meant that we've not had to impose the use of PPE. It's not been required because there's no risk. That's helped. Minimising, you know, the television being on for news items, trying to be creative gently to minimise those episodes of distress behaviour, I think, has been a really important part in this. But as Alexis says, you know, when PPE is needed to be used, it can be really daunting, and you know, those you know, receiving care find that really hard to understand.
Absolutely. I guess we've got a few situations here. So we've got the members that are still with their family, and their family have suddenly sort of been forced to become carers, and sort of certainly more than they used to be. We've got the people in care homes, we've got people who have live-in care. There's quite a wide array of people that we're kind of trying to talk to with through these chats. So can we start with the people who potentially have just been diagnosed or have been living with family members who haven't had that external care? What should family members be doing? You know, obviously they don't want to risk themselves if they're going out perhaps to work and then coming home with a risk of being someone who has COVID. Should they be wearing PPE? How should we tackle that issue?
Perhaps one of the issues that just comes to mind, I suppose, is whether people are being diagnosed as often as they would normally be, because I think a lot of the memory clinics aren't running at the moment. So where people do get referred for memory assessment and diagnosis of dementia, I think that is quite delayed for a lot of people at the moment. So I think that initial sort of step isn't necessarily there. But I suppose what I would say is it's important for people to go to their GP if they do have symptoms of dementia, if it's something they would have had investigated before, because there's a lot of other things that can look like dementia that actually aren't and that are treatable. So I would still schedule an appointment with the GP. It may well be that's more of a kind of remote conversation that you have with the GP, perhaps through a video call, but there's still quite a lot of information that can be established really through that video call, and just, I suppose, eliminating other things, like I say, that might cause dementia-like symptoms, like a thyroid problem, is really important. I suppose then when people have got a diagnosis, we're fortunate that we do still have helplines from the Alzheimer Society, from Dementia UK as well, that people can access, that they can go to the website for information, and also they can speak to people on the telephone. So the helpline from Dementia UK is actually staffed by Admiral nurses like myself, and they will give further information and advice, and signpost people to hopefully services that they can access, albeit probably in a slightly different way to normal.
And so going right back to the start, I guess, in terms of if someone suspects that one of their family members might have dementia, and what are the first initial signs that someone should be sort of letting alarm bells ring? Because obviously, again, a very scary time for everyone, but if you're suspecting that that's the case, and you can't just take someone to the doctor, you know, what are the big alarm bells?
So I guess memory loss is the most common thing that people think of, and it's normal to a certain extent to forget things. We all forget things every now and again. We all sometimes go into a room and forget why we've gone and have to retrace our steps to remember. Really, I suppose the time to be worried is when it's interfering with people's ability to do activities day to day. So if somebody, for example, is struggling to look after themselves, if perhaps they're burning things often, when they would have perhaps been a really good cook before. So there might be signs there that the person's concentration maybe isn't as good. They might forget, for example, they've left something in the oven, that they left water running. And the symptoms do vary, I guess, according to the type of dementia, but it's usually short-term memory that is affected first. So that's things that have happened sort of today, yesterday perhaps, as opposed to things that have happened a long time ago, because in Alzheimer's disease, the most common type of dementia, long-term memory is preserved for quite a long time. So people will remember, for example, the names of all their school friends, all the addresses perhaps that they've lived at for the last sort of 50 years, but they might not be able to tell you what they had for breakfast, or whether their daughter called that day. So that's probably kind of the biggest sign I would say to look out for.
And I guess we've heard, or it's quite common knowledge that the clock test, the drawing of the clock face, is that something that people could do at home with their loved ones, or is that kind of a specialist thing that gets done?
What I would say is, I suppose, the way in which the tests are administered, there is a certain amount of training that you need to make sure that you're doing it kind of in the correct way, because if you didn't, you could potentially either kind of accidentally guide the person in a certain way, or perhaps, alternatively, they might not score as well as they might in a different situation. I mean, I think if you look on particularly the Alzheimer Society's website, there's a lot of information there about sort of different signs, and the clock drawing itself is it's a test really of visual spatial ability, which is another part of cognition that can be affected by dementia. So it's testing people's ability to, on command, draw a clock. You must have a circle and the hands must be in the right places. But the interpretation of that is important as well. So, for example, if the person has a slight learning disability, or perhaps they were never taught to draw clocks or something, they might not score as well. Also, things like depression can make people score badly in things like the clock test, when actually it's because they're depressed rather than they've got dementia and it's affecting their concentration. Yeah, and I suppose the other thing is, if you were to look yourself at some of the tests that are available, you could perhaps kind of coach yourself for when the healthcare professionals do take the tests. Right. So you might perhaps score better than you normally would.
So it's better to be with professionals.
Yeah, and they are looking, I understand, a lot of memory clinics now at doing it remotely. So there's a sort of a body of research that's gathering about how to kind of do that when you can't obviously see the person exactly in what they're drawing. So it may well be that there has to be a person with them, and then they're kind of relaying the information almost like an interpreter. So yeah, there's a few things that they're looking at now, I understand.
Okay, so then we move on into the sort of, someone has had the diagnosis, and sort of what are the next steps that they should take? Obviously, access to GPs and specialists is massively reduced at the moment. So what support is out there? Dominique, could you start us off on that?
Yeah, I think just kind of underlining a few things here. I think with all of us being in lockdown and many people not working, they're either furloughed or not working as they normally would, it's highly likely family members are going to notice things that perhaps they wouldn't have done in a normal busy life. So I think noticing those things is something to be aware of, and noticing something you might not have noticed before. GPs are encouraging the population to pick up the phone. So GP surgeries are not as inundated as perhaps we all thought they might be. So carry on doing that. I think that's really important. And then to underline the point that Jane was making about charities, I sit on the Young Dementia Network and support that team in how to raise awareness of people living with dementia at a younger age. And only yesterday was with that team exploring how do we ensure charities are still accessed? How do we ensure that the charities are being creative in terms of how they give people access? And actually what we're seeing is that normal support groups are operating really well on things like Zoom, for example, and individuals are attending more of those groups than perhaps they would have done had they had to get ready, go out their front door and go to an evening somewhere. So I think not being frightened to pick up the phone to people like the Alzheimer Society, Dementia UK, the Young Dementia Network or Young Dementia UK, and just having that initial exploratory conversation around what could I access as a family member, how might I support? There is so much out there in terms of resource and support available that actually, you know, now when people aren't working and when they do have a bit more time, and I know that's not true of everybody, but where people do have a little bit more time, those, you know, people are still at the end of the phone in these charities willing to help, and they want to, so use them is what I would be saying.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I can imagine, feel quite alone and that they have to figure out a way of dealing with this themselves. And that's certainly not the case. You know, there's a ton of websites, there's advice. Only yesterday I found that there was an NHS had released a caring for someone with dementia at home resource pack. And obviously that first step is a long step until someone potentially is taken into care or into a nursing home or has a live-in carer. So again, once we have that diagnosis of someone that we loved with the disease, what steps can we take at home to kind of aid, you know, the process? You know, what are the big things that are kind of an absolute no-no? Ant, maybe you could start us on that.
One of the important things that you should do is keep a diary of the person's behaviours. That should include moods. It should include incidents that are happening, forgetfulness, whatever else is going on, and the changes that you're noticing. So when you actually come to talk to the GP or any other body that you're connected with, you can relay that information back, and you've seen all those traits and how things are changing. So that's a really good way of communicating that, to diarise that, and you will be able to go back and look and notice these things for yourself as well.
Yeah.
Just to carry on from what Dominique was saying, I think the charities have done a fabulous job of getting online and getting on Zoom, but also call into the private providers. I know for Sweet Tree and probably likely for the Good Care Group, we're always happy to have a conversation with somebody. We have had consultations, telephone consultations recently of people who have been diagnosed very recently, and they just want to know what support is out there, what we could potentially provide, and how they should proceed in future when the lockdown ends. And I think that's a great starting point. If perhaps you want to wait until the lockdown ends or wait until social distancing is eased off a bit, just have those preliminary conversations. You know, we're all in this together, and we're all there to support people in the community. And we're not just going to provide that support to our clients, but we are widening that net to help people where needed.
Yeah, and I think you make a really valid point here, because not everybody comes to that diagnosis early. Many people are coming to that diagnosis quite late, when actually their care needs are much higher than they've allowed anyone to believe. And I think when people are living in fear of their memory being something they lose, they can be quite clever at how they cope, and the coping mechanisms and strategies they put in around that are not always immediately evident. And when that does become exposed, quite often the situation is quite a lot worse than their loved one realised it was. So they're the sorts of things I'd be watching out for. And Alexis is right, we're all happy to help provide support and signpost, and where we have providers like us, and I know Sweet Tree do have a consultant admiral nurse on our team, the whole purpose of that role is to hold the hand of that family carer. So being there to support, guide and signpost, even if it's not the provision of actual care, I think is a really important part of our responsibility as providers and socially, and we can really play our part through COVID-19 in doing so.
Absolutely. And in terms of diet, is there anything specific that we should be looking out for? Any advice on that?
I think what's recommended really is, in the same way as most people, to be honest, healthy diet, healthy balanced diet, and obviously making sure people are getting enough fluids as well, which is an issue, because if you become dehydrated and you have dementia, sometimes it can make people seem a bit more confused than they are. So there's a phrase that's often used, which is called, what's good for your heart is good for your head. So all the things like eating healthily, low fat diet, not taking up smoking, all those sorts of lifestyle changes like exercise, they all really apply to dementia, and particularly people with vascular dementia.
And you mentioned water. I think we've all seen the rounds of the videos of the pods with water. I'm guessing they're not the cheapest to get hold of, and I don't know how one would get hold of them right now. Are there any other tips or tricks that we can use to feed our loved ones or water our loved ones?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds really obvious, but obviously the person's favourite drinks are the ones that they're going to naturally want to drink more of. Often people's taste changes with their dementia, so they might not be able to taste sort of more watery, less flavoured drinks. So sometimes people prefer something like blackcurrant and perhaps a bit less diluted than normal.
Okay.
So, and also things like cooling the drink makes it more attractive. So keeping perhaps some Ribena in the fridge that's already made up, or some orange. And things like texture as well sometimes can be off-putting. So just kind of looking at what the person's preferences are mainly, and trying to make them more attractive.
And presentation of food. Oh, sorry, Alexis.
Right. I was going to say there are also sneaky ways to get liquids in, like more fruit or ice lollies, soups, and it doesn't have to necessarily be presented in a mug or a glass. It can be presented in a different way. And I think people aren't always thinking outside of the box in that way, but there are really a lot of other options that aren't necessarily a drink that you can sneak bits of fluid in throughout the day.
And in terms of presentation, sorry.
Well, so leaving things around the home that are in the line of sight of the individuals. So they pick up a piece of fruit, or pick up, the glass of water that's on the side that might, so those kinds of things are pretty important as well.
Yeah, so then going in terms of presentation, is there a way to present food, i.e. mugs, cutlery, trays, that kind of thing? Colours, how are they affecting that individual, and what tricks can we use there?
So we do know that people with dementia are more likely to eat more food and drink more fluids if they're from a colour contrasting receptacle. So typically, and you can buy these online, they're sort of bright red in colour. And the reason why they're bright red in colour is that the person's vision is also affected as you get older. So as you get older, you tend not to see the blue end of the spectrum as well, but you see the red end just the same. So it's the most sort of contrasting colour. So you'll often see, for example, a white tablecloth with a red plate on, because if you were just to put a white plate on a white tablecloth with perhaps fish or something that looks the same colour, people may not see it for a start. And also they might not just kind of perceive it as being attractive, but it's mainly to do with people being able to see it properly, because obviously vision is affected, and visual spatial ability as well sometimes.
So what you mentioned about if you have a certain colour, like white on white, let's say, people might not see that. Now, I've heard the same is true of rugs on a floor, or carpets, that sort of thing, that people imagine that that's some sort of hole that they're going to fall through. Could we talk about that a little bit? And I think you might have some info on that as well.
Yeah, the contrast is the most important thing. Colours are quite subjective within dementia. Some people will say red, some people say blue. It's all about being able to see the food if it's on the plate. For instance, if you have a blue plate, you don't generally get blue food, so you can see the food. It stands out more. Again, it is quite a subjective area on this. Red can be associated with fast food. Sometimes it depends on the person, and it's a question of trying different things for different people in many cases. In case of it's generally contrast is the key to that. When you're looking at environments on a floor, a neutral environment is the best. People do mistake patterns on carpets. They will see a threshold walking into a room as an obstacle. So making the environment as clear through as possible. It's not always achievable when people are in their own home. They may have a patterned carpet and they may have rugs, but if you can identify some of that and some objects that can be potentially replaced or moved, that is beneficial.
Back to the eating, and also a bit with the environment, I think there's an element of object recognition as well. So you don't want to change too much too fast. And so think about the type of mug or the type of cutlery that somebody would typically use, and don't change it drastically, because they may not recognize it at that point.
And at what point do we start looking at signposting then? I mean, it's kind of obvious to say, when things aren't recognized, but, that could cause a little bit of conflict. It could be met with an argumentative attitude of, I don't need stuff signposted, I don't need stickers on my drawers, or so forth. So again, is there advice on that side of things?
I would say the most important thing to remember is that the person is still a person. They're still the person they were before. They're still the person that got up the day before and went to that memory clinic and got the diagnosis. And change with dementia can be quite slow, so they don't go to the memory clinic and come back a different person. If they're coping with the cutlery that they're using, if they're eating fine, you know, you don't necessarily need to make a lot of these changes. So the changes with the food, for example, typically with people with sort of moderate to late stage dementia. So I think remembering that they're still them, and just helping them to do as much for themselves as you can. So you don't want to alter their routines too much by introducing lots of different things, taking all the rugs up, replacing all the cutlery, because that can itself be sort of disconcerting. And like you say, people sort of get locked into this sort of power battle then between the person, you know, for all the right reasons, trying to make all these changes to help them, but the person with dementia actually just wants to carry on as they were as much as possible.
I think the diary piece is really important here, because and noticing the things that might be distressing somebody and when that happens. So, you know, to Jane's point, you only change something or tweak something when you notice that something is triggering that distressed behavior. And then it's about trial and error, you know, trying things that might mitigate for that or stop that. So in this process, I think, you know, the writing down, the noting, when things happen, the time of day it might happen, is it a particular event that triggers it, a particular room that triggers it? All those kinds of things are really important to notice, so that you can, you know, whether you're a family carer or a professional carer, you can start to think about those things that you might just tweak very slightly and gently, rather than making wholesale change, which can be, you know, really frightening, you know, and why many people when they move into a care home struggle, because it's such a wholesale change.
And along with that, I think it depends how much of a planner you are. We're all incredibly different, and some people want all of the information up front and they want to be able to see 2, 3, 4 years ahead, and some people just want to take it as it comes. And so I think it's also depending on the whole family unit. Where is the family in regards to the diagnosis and what's going on, and how we can lead them along this path in a person-centered, family-centered way. And alongside what Dominique was saying about that diary, I think that's incredibly important. And things change, and what works today may not work tomorrow, and maintaining flexibility is incredibly important. We happen to use the ABC charts, which work really well, and they're really widely used, and anyone can get them off of online if you do a quick search. And so that's just looking at what happened prior to the behavior and then what happened following, and how we can investigate that a bit. And it sounds really fancy, but it's really basic, and anyone can really have a go at it. So that's something that is widely used and available.
Great. And then Ant and Jane, you might be able to help with this point, but and I know that you make signage. That's sort of something that Find does. Would you, obviously, if that's not available at this moment in time, or someone can't afford it, what are the first things do you think are worth signing? And, you know, should we just put post-its up or make sticky labels, or how should we do that?
I think, as Dominique mentioned, this is all about small steps and just bringing in little bits and identifying the change that's there. And it might be beneficial that if you see somebody struggling to find items in the cupboard, that you might want to put post-it notes on there. Yeah, we created a product that helps people identify wherever the products may be in the kitchen, around the house. But yeah, you can simplify that. You can. It's a question of explaining to the person that in here, this is here. But you might have to do that numerous times. It's being patient. You've got to remember that it's a particular frustrating time for the person living with dementia, as well as the carer or the family member, and they all might have slightly different perspectives on what's going on, particularly the person living with dementia. So it's really small steps. Yes, you can start to bring little elements into that and explain, and this is why I'm doing it. Explaining why you're doing something is really beneficial. So I am going to put a sticker on there, or you can do it one at a time. I'm going to put something on here that's going to explain to you where something is, just to help you. And it's just doing those in really small incremental steps.
Great. So moving on, sort of with regards to tech and support that's available, that's out there, is there anything that you'd recommend? So Alexis, I know you sent through an article from The Economist, and there was a few things mentioned on there that was sort of a video app that people can record how to do it yourself. So whether it be, I think you scan something with your phone, like a sticker on a kettle, and it will then, your family can pre-record a video of how to switch that kettle on.
There's a variety of tech that's available. I think it's very stage specific. And Jane, I don't know if you want to pick up on that at all, but earlier in somebody's memory loss or dementia sequencing issues, they might be able to handle an app like that and really follow along. And as things progress, you have to change your methods. So there really there's a plethora of tech that's available, from GPS trackers to door sensors to PIR sensors, bed sensors. Now Apple has a few really cool gadgets that you can swap out your front door handle and lock, and it's controlled on an app. So for somebody who forgets keys a lot, you can actually lock and unlock the door remotely. Just really depends how tech savvy you are and how willing you are to adopt a lot of the tech that's out there. But really, there's an incredible range of availability. If just looking into it, it's kind of mind-blowing how quickly it's evolved. But I think for keeping people safe at home, there are a variety of options, again, stage specific. It's just looking at what is adaptable for you and your loved one, and also what stage of memory loss that they're presently in.
I think as well on technology, quite often the tools that are out there are quite good pieces of kit for the people caring for that person as opposed to the person themselves. So there's always a really great intention with things like GPS trackers, but you ask someone with dementia to wear something they've not worn for their whole lives, they just take it off. So I think it really does depend on where somebody is, what technology they used before. I watch people like Wendy Mitchell, who's living with young onset dementia, use her iPad really effectively as her window into through life. She uses photography a lot, she uses it for notes, she uses it for reminders. But that may not work for somebody at a later stage with a diagnosis. So to Alexis's point, it really does depend. This is so person specific, and we must never forget that we are individuals, and how dementia presents for me, or it might present for Jane or Alexis, could be and might be very different. So it's just understanding what's out there and drawing down on those pieces of knowledge as you go on the journey, and not trying to do everything in one go.
And if the family member isn't, you're not living with that person, there's a carer involved. So obviously, as Sweet Tree or Good Care Group would have, what's the best way for the family to get involved with that person? Is it WhatsApp, Skype, video calls? Are they worth doing, and how regularly is that a good thing to do?
I mean, we're encouraging video calls as much as possible, and FaceTime calls, Zoom calls, WhatsApp calls. It's that contact is really important. And I think a lot of people can feel quite abandoned if they don't understand why people are suddenly not coming around. It already feels like ages that they've seen their loved one. And so when it really has been, I think, we all would feel anxious and isolated. And so there's just really that human element of feeling alone.
Yeah. So. And I think that's true of both the person living with dementia and also their carer, actually, where it is a professional carer or a family member. The Good Care Group, we use technology in all of our clients' homes. Our carers will have a Chromebook that they have a unique log on to, that they can access their own, what we call carer community, that enables them not only to record the care that they're on, that they're giving to that person and everything that goes with that, whether it's medications or whatever, but it also enables them to connect with their peers out in the country. So if they want ideas on how to, get their clients' hair washed because they're having trouble doing that, or what to bake somebody that might not be recognizing something they used to like, they can share ideas. And likewise, we equip all of our clients and their families with a log on so they can have visibility of that. But also it enables them to connect with each other. So family members can choose to connect with each other as well. And these tools are being used like never before, and are incredibly important in terms, especially the video piece. Our carers have Google Hangout as their tool, whether it's Zoom or whatever else you might want to use. That's become a really important part of keeping people connected, keeping people engaged, And Jane will know because she does an awful lot of work on this, but health and well-being, not just for your client, but for the carers, is so crucial at the moment in terms of not just physical, but mental health as well. Really, really, really important.
Absolutely. I think what I've noticed is from the Facebook community on across all the dementia and Alzheimer's groups, it's, you know, certainly a lot more messages on those groups, but everyone's really getting together and helping each other out. And that's really lovely to see. I do wonder how one explains to one with Alzheimer's or dementia about the pandemic. You know, it's already confusing enough for everyone, and so is there a good way to explain it, or sort of too little, too much info obviously isn't good either? So what is the middle ground on that?
I think it's situation dependent. I mean, Jane probably, I don't know, but I think it depends on the person, where they are in their journey, how you normally communicate with them over something difficult. You know, I really do think it depends. Jane, you were going to...
there was some good advice by Dementia UK actually the other day, and they were saying that a more straightforward way of explaining it to somebody is to say something like, don't go outside, there's a really bad type of flu going around, because it's so difficult to explain to people and to get them to process and understand what's meant if you were then to talk about COVID and everything else. So what they recommend is just saying it in a really straightforward, plain English, simplified way, just to increase the chance that the person will be able to understand and retain that information.
I think that's a really good point, actually. Thank you for that. With regards to allowances and various governmental support, obviously people might have thoughts of high grandeur that putting someone into care or getting a living carer is a very expensive way of doing it, which isn't always true, we know that. But how can people get support from the government? Is there support? What sort of things can they reach out for that are free to tap into?
CHC, I suppose, would be the obvious one. We have quite a lot of clients that are in receipt of CHC funding, and in fact our care plans are based around very, very similar criteria. So applying for CHC, seeing whether you qualify, would be the most obvious way, I think.
And what does that stand for, sorry, CHC?
Continuing healthcare.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you Google continuing healthcare, it should take you to one of the government websites which explains it further, and what you would need to do is contact your local authority, and they'll point you in the right direction.
I think many
Sorry.
people don't understand how funding works in care. So I think Jane's absolutely right. You know, everybody is entitled to a continuing healthcare assessment, and it's a really good place to start, because even if you don't meet the criteria, it gives you a marker in the sand, from which you can look at, you know, when a situation declines or gets worse, whether that can be revisited. And healthcare funding is free at the point of access, and it's not means tested. And there is a perception that with dementia care it's incredibly difficult to get. That would probably be a reality for lots of people. So understanding the criteria and what is considered in continuing healthcare, I think, is really, really critical. But there are also things like attendance allowance, which people can apply for, that everybody is entitled to, irrespective of means. So that's another thing that's worth doing. And simple things that, you know, for example, I didn't know until I came into the care sector that if you do have a formal diagnosis of dementia, you're now exempt from council tax. Now, it's not a huge sum of money, but it's not insignificant either. So attendance allowance plus your, you know, council tax rebate will give you enough money to start to access a few hours of care a week, for example, that you otherwise might not have been able to afford to. A lot of these things are quite hard to navigate, so just knowing what you're entitled to is important. And also talking to people that are trained in later life advice. So individuals that are, you know, financial advisors have to be qualified to give later life advice. And it's important that you access the right type of IFA when you are looking at how do I fund my care. So going to, many of these people will give sessions, a first session free of charge that just gives you insight into what you might be able to look at and access. Things like equity in your house have always had really bad reputations. There's some really good products on the market now that won't end up in the same place as they did many years ago. So I would always start with, what am I entitled to? What do I have a right to? And how might I use my assets to best fund my later years? Because, care isn't cheap, no matter whether it's an hour a day or 24 hours a week, or, 24 hours a day, or a care home or living care. It's not cheap. But actually, when you look at your whole position and understand how that might be used, it's more accessible than people realise. And having that whole story and that whole picture is really important when you're making those care choices.
And what to add to that on a smaller scale, you can look also at events that a carer can go free with a person who has a disability or an illness, and so you can make use of getting free tickets to events. And there are other smaller benefits that will add up over time that people should be taking advantage of and looking into, and even just asking. So if it's not advertised that a carer can go with somebody for free, let's say to a concert or something of that nature, just asking. I mean, I've asked on clients' behalf for certain events I've seen just on Eventbrite, an architecture walk around Mayfair, let's say, or the city, and just said, look, this person has a care, would we have to purchase 2 tickets? And they're happy to say, no, you know what, just 1 ticket is fine. And so just asking and making use of smaller benefits like that on a day-to-day basis.
And Dominique, could you just explain what attendance allowance is, just in case someone doesn't know, please?
Yeah, so again, you would approach your local authority. You can go on to, I think it's on the gov.uk website, and you just type in attendance allowance. And this is accessible to people that need some form of support, whatever that doesn't have to be hands-on physical care. That might be help with their shopping. And it doesn't have to be used for formal care either. It might be because your daughter or your son needs to help you live your life normally to be able to stay in your own home. So it's when you, there are grades of it. So there are different levels of attendance allowance. It's not masses of money, but it is, it does contribute to you being able to access or pay for a little bit of help when otherwise you might not be able to afford to. And it's not means tested. So everybody in this country is entitled to making an application for attendance allowance, and a social worker will have a look at that application and agree to progress it or not.
Well, as you both said, it's the little things that then add up. So you might not be getting a huge amount of money from one place, but if you know where to go for help, then every little helps,
Exactly.
And absolutely, with your point on the asking about the tickets, Alexis, that's not only true of carers, but certainly carers within other disabilities as well. So I've seen it with elderly people in general, and if you don't ask, you don't get, right? So sometimes we just have to ask those questions, and don't be ashamed to ask. And sort of moving on with that point, I think it's really important to say that there's no shame in asking for care or looking at care options. And I know you're sort of, both of you work, obviously live in care and home care. So what are those first steps? Is it just a phone call to see what my options are? Where can I find out more information on care in general?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would be saying to anybody, nobody really investigates what their care options are until they need them. Quite often that need comes at a point of crisis, and making decisions in the context of crisis are not always the best decisions we make. So exploring what's out there is important, and taking the time to do that well, I think, is really important. I know that we at the Good Care Group, and I know Alexis and the team at Sweet Tree, are really happy to have an exploratory conversation with somebody, irrespective of whether they move forward with their choice of care with you or not. We take our responsibility to signpost really, really seriously. And if we know that somebody's not quite ready for living care, we'll talk about what other options are available. And we'll also talk about the differences between living in a care home versus having a living carer, for example, and the pros and cons of both, because it really does depend on the individual as to what's right for that person and where that person's going to live their life well. And it's in no one's interest to sign, it's in our interest to do that signpost in a way that's safe for that person and right for that person. All too often we find people come to us really in a panic and a crisis, and we try to just get them to take a breath and slow down and ask them what they've thought about in terms of those care options, because no one cares about care until they need it. I really believe that. And sometimes that can lead to decisions that aren't always the best.
And I would just add to that, and I'm sure you have the same on your website, Dominique. We have so much information on our website that is free to consume, and we have a frequently asked questions, so questions to ask home care providers. That's a PDF document that you can download right off our website. And because we have a 2-hour minimum for care, some people who need 30 minutes or an hour, it's not a good fit for Sweet Tree. And so we'll direct them to that FAQ section and say, look, when you're having discussions with other home care providers, here is a list of questions that you should be looking to ask to see if it's the right fit for you. And so, as we've been saying all along, it's really our social responsibility, our social duty to arm people with information. There are a lot of options out there, and just understanding where to go and where to go to ask the right questions, I think, is a great first step. And look at the websites, make phone calls, do that.
Know the regulatory context as well, because I think many people, when they start their care exploration, price will be an absolutely primary focus for them. And there are, knowing that some providers provide care in an unregulated way, and what that means is really important, versus a provider that's regulated and inspected by the Care Quality Commission. Knowing the difference between the two is key. So many people who buy unregulated care do not understand that they become the employer, and in that process effectively have to give those people all the employment rights that they would get if they were going to apply for a job elsewhere. And so making sure the risks associated or the benefits associated with all of those options, I think, is really, really important.
It doesn't have to cost the earth, though, does it? I think people instantly imagine that care is going to mean that I have to sign over my house or I have to get a loan from the bank. It doesn't have to be that way. And at least if they have a conversation, then they can explore those options. And like I said, there's no shame in that at all. And that's something really, a real strong message that we need to put out there. And I'm sorry, I totally forgot to ask you earlier in regards to memory rooms. So just tracking back a little bit, I know that you guys at Find Memory do create memory rooms that take us back sort of X amount of years for the individual to sort of feel sort of in line with their memories from childhood. Is that right? Can you just explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, not specifically taking them back to an era. Okay. It's about creating an environment that's meaningful to somebody, and not creating a lie within a care home. So this is a slightly different sector to the home care. This is within the care homes and within hospitals. So we create environments where it means something to somebody. It might be a bistro, it might be a cafe, but these are important things to remember, that if you create an environment, it should be meaningful. So if it is a cafe, it should be serving drinks. If it is if it is an area that's we put post offices and things in there, but again, you utilize it for letter writing, have somebody to deliver the post, make it so it's really a meaningful environment for somebody, as well as a wayfinding area. If you have a sweet shop, sell sweets, or make them available. If you have a flower shop, have flowers in there. Flowers tell you, they can tell you a lot about a person. Somebody might like daffodils, somebody might like something else. It helps with seasons. There's way too much to go into for all the environmental elements of it in this conversation. But yeah, it's not specifically taking somebody back to an era. It's making something recognizable and meaningful for them, and making the environment stimulating for that person, so that they're occupied, they're reducing the restlessness, and they're reducing the anxiety. And again, if you've got a cafe area, it helps to give somebody a drink there. It's pointless. You wouldn't go to a cafe and sit in it and not have a drink. So it's an important factor. But again, helps with nutrition, helps with hydration. Hydration, as we mentioned earlier, is the key to a lot of issues. It can reduce people's reduce falls, reduce all sorts of issues that come along, and hydration and nutrition is one of the most important things, and it's just giving somebody that.
I think in Switzerland they created a whole village in a care home, didn't they? Where you have like a high street, and you've got people that can work in each of the shops and so forth. And that's a really lovely idea. Now, on a sort of shoestring, and if someone's at home with their family, would it be a good idea if a family wanted to get together with the grandkids and create a space for a day for an individual, or would that be a little bit too confusing?
I think you might be confusing people in that environment. It's about, again, as we've mentioned all the way through, it's about the person. This is all person centered. It's about the person. It's about the stage that they're at, and it's about what they're going to enjoy out of that. So yeah, people love to reminisce. We all love to reminisce. We all talk about what we used to do, and that's an important part of it. But that's not the be all and end all of life. If it just takes you to a nice place, then that's what you're trying to encourage. You're trying to stimulate the person and give them an enjoyable time. Stimulating memories, positive memories is really good. That can be done through numerous different things, through old photographs. You don't have to spend money particularly. You can just have a conversation about what you used to. It's about taking the person to that nice place in time to reduce that element of restlessness.
Lovely, thank you. And Jane, could you tell us a little bit about, I've seen a lot about dolls and pet replicas and soft toys and things like that, and how useful that is?
Yeah, I mean, I would say particularly the dolls, it is quite a contentious subject. So people have quite strong feelings generally one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe if I just explain what doll therapy is. So it's a type of therapy where the person is basically given like a child's doll to interact with. It's usually people in the later stages of dementia. Some people with dementia will think it's actually a baby and will respond to it as if it is a real baby. And for them, I suppose that meets a lot of emotional needs in terms of comfort and kind of having a role, being a mother. Some people will see them as dolls, but still like to carry them all the same. And then, of course, you'll have people that don't like them, find them patronizing. So the way in which they're approached usually is quite careful. So if you're not sure whether how the person's going to respond and whether they're going to think it's patronizing or whether they're going to enjoy the experience, what you would do is say to the person something quite neutral, like, "Oh, look who I've got here, what do you think?" And then if the person says, "Oh, that's a nice doll," you continue your conversation of if that's a doll, as if it's a doll, and you would kind of talk about the doll. Did you used to have dolls, that sort of thing, and just see how they respond. Similarly, people might say, "Oh, look, oh gosh, what's her name?" And that you can tell that they think it's a baby. So again, you would sort of handle it as if it's a baby, ask them if they want to hold it, he or she, and yeah, sort of go from there. So you're very much kind of led by the person's responses. The other one, which is less contentious, is pet therapy, which is where you have animals that would come and interact with the person. And again, it meets a lot of those kind of emotional needs in terms of having activity. There's a certain level of comfort as well, I think, if you're sort of able to interact with it. So be that a dog, or I think in some cases, excuse me, there've been mental health wards where they've brought owls and all sorts of things on the wards, and same with care homes. So kind of interacting with something that's kind of alive and that you can nurture, we know is good for people. The third type is this kind of animatronic animal, which again sort of risks the same stuff doubles, that the person might realise that they are being deceived to some extent, they might be angry, or probably more likely they'll just see it as a toy which they may or may not like, and then you just kind of be led by looking at their body language, looking at what they're saying, to see whether it's something they would like to interact with or not really. So yeah, there's all sorts of things, from cats that will curl up and sort of breathe, there's other cats I've seen where if you stroke them, they'll kind of purr and make noises and roll over. And so, yeah, it goes from sort of very simple to kind of really complex stuff. So people can have these in their homes, they can have them in care homes, and wards in any place really. And yeah, on the whole, providing you have the right people, they were quite helpful and quite therapeutic for people.
I think, like you said, it's about being guided.
On that, we offer these products. We have our own doll. We have our own animatronic pets and such, and it is a completely subjective area. So it is absolutely down to the person. If they don't like it, I'll be entirely honest. When we started out with our doll, I didn't like it. I didn't get it. I really had to get my head around it and how it worked. But seeing the responses from different people is well, it's quite amazing actually. You do get people that will embrace it. They'll want to hold it. They'll nurture it. They won't let go of it. Through to people that just don't want to know. They'll go, yeah, nice baby, give it back. Nice doll. It's a doll. Why do I want a doll? What do I want a doll for? And they'll give it you back. But it's a lot of that is down to the relationship between the carer and the person living with dementia. Again, it's knowing the person. It's the stage in the journey. It's such a subjective area. But if it works, if something works for somebody, great. If it doesn't, then it's trial and error. I'm sure you guys have first-hand experience of this to a greater extent than I do, but it is completely subjective all the way. It's literally small, as we said before, small steps. Try something. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah. And it's about, I think, also keeping our own sort of feelings out of it. Because again, I started out as being someone that was really, really against particularly the dolls. And what they represented, and it felt dishonest. Didn't like the idea, but then you see for some people how well it works. And again, if you just kind of look up on Google, you'll see photographs of people, just absolutely transformed by these things. And I guess I kind of realised it's not about me. It's not about my feelings and what I would want. It's about this person and what they would want. So
you've hit the nail on the head. It's not about you. It's not about me. And I was of exactly the same opinion. And we were asked so many times for a doll, and I thought, no, I don't get it. I don't like it. I think it's dishonest, and you are fooling somebody. But when we've seen the responses and how it's worked and what a difference it's made to some people, we've had occurrences where we've had a lady that she didn't speak. She was in a care environment. She'd not spoken to anybody for a long time, and then suddenly picked up the doll, and it brought the whole of the care home into, well, they were in tears at the response of the seeing this lady with it. More really because they didn't realise that she was able to do this, which is a sorry state, but it brought it home very quickly that she was capable of having this relationship, if you like, with this doll. And it's quite a peculiar scenario when you see it actually in action, and it does take some getting used to. But if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Yeah, and we don't have to spend money, I guess, buying these things straight off the bat. There is a way, obviously, a lot of this information, and you can go and meet a lot of these companies and people and support networks at places like the Alzheimer show, which is where we kind of mostly all know each other from. And that, I believe, is once a year at Olympia, am I right in saying? I think it has been postponed this year, but that is a really good place for people to start with the journey, and just find out more information, see some of these products, speak to specialists and professionals, and kind of build up your network of support. So I'd really recommend the Alzheimer's show, and I'm sure you all would as well. So I'm going to ask a few questions. We've had a few people get in touch, and I've seen a few subjects that have been prominent on some of the groups, and then we'll end our section with some good news. So first question was, what do I do about my husband eating everything in sight? I sleep and he gets into stuff. Unlocking cabinets isn't an option as it angers him. He's not an angry man, but I have to stop shopping and use everything first, and then I end up shopping daily.
It's hard. It's really hard, and I think it's particularly common with people with frontotemporal dementia, and that part of the brain that would normally say, "I'm not hungry" or "I've already eaten something," just doesn't work. So people will be at a buffet and they'll compulsively just carry on eating everything sort of quite impulsively. And restricting food is obviously the most easy, but the other thing that can happen sometimes is sometimes people take medications that make them more hungry, particularly antipsychotic medications. And again, if that's the case, there are some types of antipsychotic that don't have those side effects, so it might be worth just discussing that with the prescriber of the medications. If the person is feeling kind of hungry all the time, sometimes people are more likely to eat sweet things. So again, particularly people with frontotemporal dementia, if they see a box of chocolates, they'll just eat all of it. But if there was a loaf of bread there, let's say, they probably wouldn't eat that. So it's about kind of learning, I suppose, what they're more likely to go for and what you need to kind of lock away, possibly, or yeah, find another place of putting it that they're not expecting. And again, of course, that can cause arguments, and that might be really difficult. So it's just trying to find a solution that suits both people, really.
Thank you. Deterioration in sleeping. So my loved one is sleeping for up to 20 hours a day. I don't know what to do. Do I wake them up or let them be?
I can answer that one. Sleep is often changed by age and dementia as well. Sleeping 20 hours a day when someone's got quite advanced dementia can happen, but it's unusual. People tend to sleep more when they're stressed. And I think a lot of people are finding with the COVID and everything and all the sort of stresses that are around their sleeping more than usual. And when people are sleeping, they're spending more time in the type of sleep where they're dreaming, which actually means that they're more tired when they wake up. So it kind of depends what sort of sleep you're getting as well. It might be worth just checking with the GP that there isn't anything wrong. Just checking that, I guess, their food and fluid intake is okay. GPs honestly don't mind if you call them and just say, I'm really concerned that they're sleeping this much. It seems strange. Something like depression could cause it as well. So again, the GP would probably look at doing a screening for depression, looking to see whether that might be the cause, because often people that are depressed, they sleep a lot, but also they can sometimes pretend to be asleep because they find just interacting with people too difficult and too tiring. So I would probably speak to the GP.
Lovely.
Get reassured.
Brilliant. All right, so let's end on sort of our good news section. So Alexis, I know there's a couple of things happening with Sweet Tree that are being developed. If you could kick us off, please.
Sure. So next Tuesday, we are launching our 5-part interactive informal care support series. That will be hosted on Zoom, so people can look out for that information. And the 5 topics will be not only around dementia care, but managing well-being for carers, so for family carers or friends and neighbors who are caring for somebody with dementia. It will be around COVID and the impacts on somebody with dementia. So we picked up on that a bit today, some basic general dementia knowledge, early signs and symptoms, and also future planning. So future planning and Q&A, looking for it to be incredibly interactive and open to the public.
Great, and that's just going to be a series of training videos that you'll be showing on Zoom, is that right?
They will be live. They will be live, and we'll launch that this coming Tuesday, and then we will see how it goes, and hopefully, if it catches on, we can continue on with that. So that's something that we're incredibly excited about.
And how does one find the sign up for that? Will you be posting that on social media? Obviously, we can post that on our page as well, but do we need to sign up to a link of some sort? Or
so there will be a link. The signups will be on social media and also on our website as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And then can you tell us a little bit about the National Carers Day?
Yes, so that will be open as well to anyone. The National Cares Day is really to recognize informal carers, and what we will do is host an award ceremony for nominations for informal carers who we feel have gone above and beyond, especially during the COVID pandemic. And we'd like to honor our informal carers. We do a lot for our formal carers, and we would like to give a round of applause to everyone who has really stepped up to care for their loved ones during this time. That will be launched, I believe, in line with the Alzheimer show, which will be in October, and really tied into the National Carers Day.
So how can someone nominate someone for an award?
So look out for information on that. I think that the planning is really in infancy, but it was something that we thought was pertinent, and I think Nigel as well felt for the Alzheimer show that this year, with all the bumps that life has thrown at everyone really globally, that this is a really great way to come together and honor informal carers.
Brilliant. Has anyone got anything to add just for the end?
Could you try again?
Oh, that was my iPhone asking.
Sorry, Siri listening to me there. All right, well, thank you very much for all your time. Really appreciate it. We hope that this is going to launch a series of these panel chats, whether it be across our streaming platform or any others. It's really important that we're always talking, communicating, and offering help out there, and also making people realize how much free support there is out there. Like we said, it doesn't have to cost the earth. There's a lot of people wanting to have conversations and very willing to. So once again, thank you everyone. Really appreciate your time today. And if you do have any questions or anything, please do message us on our Facebook, and we will be sure to pass the questions on to our panel of specialists. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a lovely day and speak to you soon.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.